A man walks toward a dumpster in the dead of night. He is pushing a cart, and something heavy is inside, covered by a white sheet. He struggles to lift it, adjusting his grip as the weight shifts awkwardly. And then something slips. For just a moment, what appears to be a human arm hangs over the edge. Days earlier, a 30-year-old mother of two had vanished without a trace. There was no body and no witnesses. Only this video and a question that still haunts investigators. What really happened to Ashley Elkins? Ashley Elkins was 30 years old, a mother of two and a hairstylist building her life in Warren, Michigan. On January 2, 2025, she left her home to run errands, and she never came back. At first, it seemed like a missing person case, another sudden disappearance with more questions than answers. But for Ashley's family, something did not feel right. They pushed, they searched, and they refused to let her story fade. What investigators would eventually uncover turned this case into something far more disturbing. Her phone was traced to the home of her ex-boyfriend. Inside that apartment, police say they found signs of a violent crime. Blood, later confirmed to be Ashley's, was discovered in the bathroom. Then came the surveillance footage. A man, a cart, a heavy covered object, and what appeared to be an arm. Ashley's body has never been found. There were no eyewitnesses and no confirmed murder weapon. Yet prosecutors say the evidence tells a chilling story, one of planning, violence, and an attempt to erase a life completely. This case shocked the community not just because of how Ashley disappeared, but because of what may have happened after. And at the center of it all is the man she once trusted, her ex-boyfriend. Deandra Booker. Ashley Elkins was more than just a name in a headline. She was 30 years old, a mother raising two young sons who depended on her every single day, and a hairstylist known for working hard and building something of her own. Her life was rooted in Warren, Michigan, a place where routines are familiar and people tend to know one another. To those closest to her, Ashley was trying to move forward. Her relationship with Deandra Booker had ended, and by all accounts, it was something she was leaving behind. She was focused on her children, focused on her work, and focused on rebuilding her life. But the past did not seem ready to let her go. Just days before she disappeared, on New Year's Eve, something unsettling happened. According to her sister, Booker showed up at Ashley's home salon, but not as himself. He used a fake name. Ashley saw him, and instead of confronting him, she hid. She waited until he left. That moment, quiet and tense and easy to overlook, would later take on a much darker meaning because just 2 days later, Ashley vanished. On January 2, 2025, she left her home to run errands. It was supposed to be routine, temporary, the kind of everyday trip no one thinks twice about. But she never returned. By the next day, January 3rd, she was reported missing. For her family, the fear set in quickly. This was not like her. Ashley did not just disappear. She had 2 children waiting for her and a life she was actively living. As days passed with no answers, her loved ones took matters into their own hands. They searched, they spoke out, and they pushed for attention. In the middle of that search, they made a critical discovery. Ashley's phone had been tracked, and it led to Deandra Booker's home. Suddenly, the situation shifted. What started as a missing person case now pointed somewhere far more serious. Investigators began looking closer at Booker, and what they would soon uncover inside his apartment and beyond would transform concern into something much darker. This was no longer just about where Ashley had gone. It was about what might have already been done to her. On January 2, 2025, Ashley Elkins walked out of her home in Warren, Michigan. It was supposed to be a normal day. She told no one anything unusual, and there were no signs of distress, no indication that anything was wrong. And then she was gone. Hours passed and then a full day. By January 3rd, her family reported her missing. At first, there were only questions. Where did she go? Who had she seen? And what happened between the moment she left home and the moment she vanished? But behind the scenes, something far more disturbing was already beginning to take shape. Investigators would later allege that Ashley never made it far. According to prosecutors, she ended up at the Roseville apartment of her ex-boyfriend, Deandra Booker. What happened inside that apartment is not captured on video, and there are no eyewitnesses. But the evidence investigators say they found tells a chilling story. On January 7th, police searched Booker's apartment. Inside the bathroom, they discovered a large amount of blood, not just traces, not something easily explained away, but a significant amount. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Ashley Elkins. Investigators also found her blood and DNA in the bathtub drain. Alongside it, they recovered a family earring and a bullet. No weapon was recovered, but the scene painted a picture of violence, a struggle that did not end with someone walking away. And yet there was no body, no sign of Ashley leaving that apartment alive. As investigators worked to piece together what happened next, another piece of evidence emerged: surveillance footage. A camera captured a man moving through the area, pushing a cart. Inside the cart was something large, concealed under a white sheet. The man appeared to struggle with the weight, adjusting his grip and forcing the cart forward. Then at the dumpster, he tried to lift it, and that is when something caught investigators' attention. For a brief moment, something appeared to slip from beneath the covering. What looked like a human arm hanging off the side. The man quickly continued, pushing the object into the dumpster. The footage did not clearly identify his face, but detectives testified that the individual's clothing closely matched what Booker had been seen wearing earlier that day. A dark coat with a fur hood, black pants with holes, a black hat, and black shoes with white bottoms. When police later searched his home, they found clothing consistent with that description. Ashley disappears on January 2nd. Her phone leads back to Booker. Days later, her blood is found inside his apartment, and in between a man, a cart, and a possible body being discarded. But what happened after that raised even more questions. Investigators traced a trash bin connected to the apartment complex, Hampton Court Apartments. Using GPS data from garbage trucks servicing the area, they followed the route. It led them to a landfill in Lenox Township, Pine Tree Acres. Dozens of officers began searching the site. Day after day, they combed through massive amounts of waste, hoping to find any trace of Ashley, anything that could confirm what happened, anything that could bring her home. But after a week, the search was called off. They found nothing, no body, and no definitive physical proof of where she ended up. Ashley Elkins had vanished, and according to prosecutors, the only place that disappearance could have begun was inside that apartment. A place where they say something violent happened, something that someone then tried to erase completely. A story that investigators believe pointed directly to one person. From the moment Ashley Elkins was reported missing, the case began as a search, but it did not stay that way for long. Her family refused to wait. They pushed for answers, and in doing so, they uncovered something critical. Ashley's phone had been tracked, and the location it pointed to would change everything. It led directly to the home of her ex-boyfriend, Deandra Booker. That single detail shifted the focus of the investigation almost immediately. Now, this was not just about where Ashley had gone. It was about who she had lost been connected to. Police began zeroing in on Booker. In the early stages, he was arrested not for murder, but for lying to an officer. A smaller charge, but one that allowed investigators to bring him in while they continued building their case. Behind the scenes, they were gathering evidence, and what they would uncover inside his Roseville apartment raised serious concerns. On January 7th, investigators executed a search of the residence. What they found inside the bathroom was difficult to ignore. A large amount of blood, not isolated and not minimal, but substantial. Testing later confirmed that the blood belonged to Ashley Elkins. And it was not just one area. Investigators found her DNA and blood in the bathtub drain. Alongside it, a family earring was recovered, as well as a bullet. No firearm was found and no clear explanation for how that bullet ended up there. But taken together, the evidence suggested something violent had occurred in that space, something that had not been reported, and something that had not been explained. Investigators began to look deeper, not just at the physical evidence, but at behavior, digital behavior, and search history. What they found added another layer to the case. In the weeks leading up to Ashley's disappearance, Booker had made a series of Google searches. On December 15th, how to make her miss you. On December 16th, how to make her miss you after the breakup. Then, just days later, on December 22nd, silencer 9mm. Individually, each search might raise an eyebrow, but together they painted a timeline of escalating concern. From relationship questions to something far more alarming. Booker's defense would later argue that such searches do not necessarily indicate criminal intent, that many people consume true crime content or search unusual topics without acting on them. But for investigators, these searches became part of a broader pattern, one they could not ignore. Meanwhile, detectives continued reconstructing Ashley's final movements. They worked to establish where she had been, who she had contacted, and how her path may have intersected with Booker on January 2nd. And then there was the surveillance footage, a key piece of evidence that would become central to the case. Detective Chris Moran testified about what the footage showed: a man pushing a cart toward a dumpster. Inside the cart was a large object covered in a white sheet. The man appeared to struggle with it, as if the weight was significant, as if it was not easy to move. And then during the attempt to lift it into the dumpster, something slipped. What appeared to be an arm hanging briefly over the side, before disappearing from view. The footage did not clearly identify the man, but another detective, Patrick Taylor, noted striking similarities. The clothing worn by the individual in the video matched what Booker had been seen wearing earlier that day: a dark coat with a fur hood, black pants with holes, a black hat, and black shoes with white bottoms. When police searched his apartment, they found clothing consistent with that exact description, and one item stood out: the coat. It had a faded area, something investigators believed could be dry blood dot at this point. The investigation was no longer speculative. It was building piece by piece, evidence by evidence. But there was still one major problem: nobody. Without it, the case relied heavily on circumstantial evidence, powerful but still incomplete. Investigators needed more, so they followed another lead: the dumpster, specifically the trash bin associated with the Hampton Court apartments. Using GPS tracking data from garbage trucks that serviced the area, investigators traced where that trash had been taken. The trail led to Pine Tree Acres landfill in Lenox Township, a massive site with difficult terrain and an overwhelming volume of waste. Still, dozens of officers began searching. They combed through the landfill for days, looking for any trace of Ashley, anything that could confirm what they believed had happened. The search was intense, focused and relentless, but after a week, it was called off. Nothing was found. No remains and no definitive physical evidence of where Ashley ended up. Despite that, prosecutors believed they had enough. By late January, Deandra Booker was charged with first-degree premeditated murder, along with multiple additional charges: tampering with evidence, disinterment and mutilation of a body, concealing a death, and lying to a police officer. He pleaded not guilty. The case would move forward without a body, without eyewitnesses, and without a recovered weapon, but with a growing collection of evidence that investigators say points in one direction: toward what they believe happened inside that apartment, and toward the man they say is responsible. At first, the case seemed to follow a clear direction: a missing woman, a suspicious ex-boyfriend, blood inside an apartment, and surveillance footage that raised chilling questions. But as the investigation deepened, the case became more complicated and more uncertain. For all the disturbing evidence, there were still critical pieces missing. There were no eyewitnesses, no one who saw Ashley enter the apartment, and no one who saw what happened inside. And perhaps most significantly, there was no body. Despite days of searching a landfill, despite tracking the trash route, and despite narrowing down the timeline, Ashley Elkins was never found. That absence created a gap, one that the defense quickly focused on. They argued that the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence, that suspicion, no matter how strong, is not proof. Even the surveillance footage, the most haunting piece of evidence, was not definitive. Detectives testified that the man in the video could not be clearly identified. There was no face and no direct confirmation, only similarities in clothing. While investigators pointed to the coat found in Booker's apartment, one that appeared to have possible dried blood, the defense could challenge interpretation. Was it blood? How did it get there? And could it be definitively linked to the crime? Then there were the internet searches. To investigators, they suggested a troubling pattern, but to the defense, they were just searches, curiosity, and not intent. It introduced doubt, not about whether the situation was serious, but about whether it could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Ashley's case did not begin with a confirmed crime scene. It began with a disappearance, a woman leaving her home for errands and never returning. Everything that followed had to be reconstructed and pieced together from fragments. Blood evidence, digital history, surveillance footage, and timelines. Each piece pointed in a direction, but none on its own told the full story. Even investigators acknowledged the challenges. Without a body, without a weapon, and without direct witnesses, the case relied on building a narrative through evidence. A narrative that prosecutors believed was clear, but one that the defense would work to dismantle. As the preliminary examination unfolded in August 2025, testimony brought these tensions into focus. Detectives laid out what they saw, what they recovered, and what they believed happened, and yet at every step the question remained. Was it enough? Despite those uncertainties, the judge made a decision. DeAndre Booker would be bound over for trial. The case would move forward, not because every question had been answered, but because taken together, the evidence was considered strong enough to be heard in full. And that decision marked a turning point, because now this was not just an investigation. It was a case heading toward trial, a case where two very different narratives would collide. One built on evidence pointing to a violent end, and the other built on doubt, gaps, and unanswered questions. And at the center of it all, a woman who vanished and a truth that still had not been fully seen. By the time the case reached this point, investigators believed they understood what had happened. Not because of a confession, and not because a body was found, but because of how every piece of evidence fit together. Prosecutors alleged that on January 2, 2025, Ashley Elkins went to DeAndre Booker's apartment in Roseville. And inside that apartment, something turned violent. The blood found in the bathroom, later confirmed to be Ashley's, was not minimal. It was significant and found in multiple places, including the bathtub drain. Alongside it, a bullet and a personal earring. Signs investigators say that this was not an accident and not something that could be easily explained. After that moment, prosecutors alleged the focus shifted from violence to concealment. They believe Booker attempted to cover up what had happened. That is where the surveillance footage becomes critical. A man believed by investigators to be Booker is seen pushing a cart. Inside it's something large and covered, heavy enough to struggle with. And for a brief second, what appears to be an arm hanging before the object is forced into a dumpster. From there, the trail leads to the landfill, where Ashley's body was never recovered. No witnesses ever came forward, and no weapon was ever found. And yet prosecutors argue that the totality of the evidence tells one consistent story: that Ashley Elkins was killed inside that apartment, and her body was removed, transported, and disposed of, an attempt to erase what happened and to leave behind no trace. But despite that effort, traces remained. In the blood, in the video, in the timeline, and in the growing weight of evidence that ultimately led to one man being charged with her murder. A case built without a body, the one that according to investigators reveals exactly how it ended. As the case moved forward, the legal outcome was not a final verdict, but a critical step toward one. After months of investigation, testimony, and mounting evidence, a judge ruled that there was enough to proceed. DeAndre Booker would stand trial. He was formally charged with first-degree premeditated murder, along with multiple additional offenses, including tampering with evidence, disinterment or mutilation of a body, concealing a death, and lying to a police officer. In court, Booker pleaded not guilty to all charges, despite the disturbing evidence presented, despite the blood, the surveillance footage, and the digital trail. The case had not yet reached a final conclusion. Instead, it entered the next phase, a trial where both sides would present their arguments in full. Prosecutors made their position clear. They described the case as deeply disturbing and acknowledged that Ashley Elkins had not been found, but emphasized that the evidence in their view strongly supported moving forward. Their goal was to prove that Ashley was killed and that Booker was responsible. The defense, however, stood firm. They pointed to the gaps: no body, no eyewitnesses, and no confirmed murder weapon. They argued that suspicion, even strong suspicion, does not equal proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the case remained unresolved in the eyes of the court. Booker was held in custody, denied bond, and awaited trial in Macomb County Jail, a trial that would ultimately determine his fate. But for Ashley Elkins, the outcome was far more painful. She has never been found. Despite extensive searches and weeks of effort at the landfill, there has been no recovery, no burial, and no final goodbye. Her family is left with unanswered questions and a loss that feels incomplete. Two young sons are left without their mother, still waiting for answers that may never fully come. And as the legal process continues, one truth remains at the center of it all. A woman disappeared. Evidence suggests she never made it out of that apartment. And while the courts work toward a final judgment, Ashley Elkins is still missing. Cases like this leave behind more than evidence. They leave silence, the kind that lingers in a home where someone never returned, and in the questions children ask that no one knows how to answer. Ashley Elkins did not just disappear from a timeline. She disappeared from daily life, from routines, from conversations, and from the future she was building for her two sons. Even now, as the case moves through the courts, one piece of the story is still missing her. There has been no recovery, no closure, and no final place for her family to grieve. Only the weight of what investigators believe happened and the end uncertainty that still surrounds it. This case forces a difficult question. How do you measure justice when the person at the center of it is still gone? For prosecutors, the answer may come in a courtroom. For the defense, it rests on doubt. But for Ashley's family, justice is something far more personal. It is about the truth. It is about answers. And it is about a mother who left home one day and never made it back. Because in the end, beyond the evidence, beyond the charges, and beyond the trial, there is a life that has not been found, and a story that even now feels unfinished.